I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Bob Sunderhoff. I am a member of the Board of Directors of the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District. And I think, what was the year? 82, I think, that came onto the board. So I've been on a good many years on the Board of Directors. And what I'm going to do at this time is go ahead and I'm going to have my directors and the people that work, the staff from the Upper Ark, to introduce themselves and maybe just a little bit about themselves and the areas that they represent. So basically, just to start with, our district, the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District, and I will refer to it as the district many times today, consists of basically Fremont County, Custer County, Chaffee County. There's a small portion of El Paso County that is also in the district, and also a small portion going up the pass, Saguache County. Thank you. So that gives you kind of an idea as to the area that we cover, and each one of the directors or staff that are on the table here this afternoon represent different areas, and it's by school districts. So they represent various school districts, and that's how they are appointed to this board. There's been many questions that have come up to me recently, is how the board is put together, and all of us are appointed by a district judge to sit on this board. So that's where the authority comes for the placement on the board itself. So I'll start off to my left, and I'm going to ask my directors to introduce themselves. So Tom, if you would start off.
My name is Tom Goodwin, and I'm the at-large and represent El Paso, Fremont, Chaffee, and Saguache County.
Bill Donnelly, I represent Custer County.
Are you replacing Keith Hood? Are you replacing Keith Hood, Bill?
No.
Has he been replaced?
No,
He's
he is
not
not
on
a
this
member of this
board.
board.
I thought he
He
was.
never has been.
He's on the round
Okay.
table. He's a member of the round table, Arkansas Basin Round
See, I
Table.
don't know the difference. I just saw his name on the
Yeah.
round table.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Richard Hildebrand, this is my first term, and I represent Fremont School District 2. I live in Penrose.
Tim Canterbury, and I represent RE3 School District, Coxsackie. I live in Howard.
What's your profession?
I'm still trying to make a living in the cow business.
I thought you mowed lawns.
Cows do.
That's it. I'll start down. Ken, do you want to, Ken Baker, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Ken Baker. I was one of the people who organized the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District many years ago. And I was the attorney and manager for a number of years. During that period of time, I filed an application with the court to create a augmentation plan, which, along with the state water engineer and the division engineer, we were able to accomplish through the water court, and has been in operation in the upper district and throughout Fremont County for some time. Thank you.
York?
Good afternoon. My name is George Gertson. I'm the hydrologist for the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District. My duties include maintaining the reservoirs, stream gauges, requesting the replacements on a weekly basis, talking to your local water commissioner, making sure our replacements are made timely, and then also doing all the accounting and storage accounting for all of our reservoirs and water transactions.
Bob, face to speak out.
I'm sorry.
Speak louder. That's what she said.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. Guys, talk louder. Okay.
My name's Tom French. I represent the RE3 district in western Fremont County on the board of directors.
Greg Felt, I live in Salida. I'm one of the two board members who represent Southern California, Southern Chamber County. So it's R32J. I'm also chairman of the Board of Commissioners for Chaffee County. And so I do a lot of work with Jay and Bill and Tom in terms of our judicial district that we're all a part of, and some of the economic development efforts that we do, and serve on the Basin Roundtable as well.
Are you related to James Felt, the attorney, water law attorney in Colorado Springs?
I'm not.
Okay.
Okay, Tim?
Tim Payne, Fremont County. I represent RE1 School District. I live in Canyon City. I'm also a Fremont County Commissioner. And like Greg, I interact with your commissioners all the time on different things.
I'm Terry Skanga. I'm the General Manager of the Upper Arkansas District. I started on this district as a board member in 1987 as a director at large to cover all the district. I became manager in 2001 when Mr. Baker retired.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Manera. I'm the district's water engineer. I'm a consulting engineer with Colorado River Engineering is my company. I assist the district with water resources planning and also work on their storage structures.
My name is Kendall Burgermeister, and I'm the attorney for the district.
Okay. Okay. And the one that really runs everything for us in the district is over here to my right. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Well, I don't know about that. My name is Kimberly Krischke, and I am the secretary for the district.
Good enough. And we do have a number of other, few more staff members as well. And before I turn it over to the Kendall and Chris to make their presentations, I would like to say that originally, a number of years ago, the county commissioners are the ones that originally tried to get the county into the district. I think we had a number of water issues in those days in Custer County, and they felt as though at that point in time that it was needed to join an organization of this nature because of the knowledge and the time and the cost to run an organization of this nature. So anyway, that was under the leadership then of Joe Reed, which many of you know. Some of you probably did not know Joe. He has now passed, but anyway, it was very critical as to putting this organization together with the existing district. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn the meeting over to our attorney, Kendall, and he's going to have part of the presentation, and Chris will have the next part of the presentation. And then if we should probably hold any questions that anybody has after their presentations, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tim Canterbury to answer questions and field questions from the audience. So,
I was told that this has been signed off at a level so high that there's no chance to oppose this augmentation plan at our level. Is that true?
why don't we address that after the presentations?
Well, I just want to know if this is a waste of time.
I do not believe it's a waste of time.
You're presenting something that we have no chance of really having a say. Is that true?
That's completely false.
Okay, that's all.
Bear with us.
That's all you have to say. I'll listen to the whole
We're going to
deal.
get it all on the table.
Okay.
Good enough. Thank you. Kendall?
So this isn't an ideal setup, so I apologize if I'm blocking the screen. It's a little small as it is, and so we this will be good. Is that picking me up okay? Can everybody? We handed out a few copies of some of the slides that I knew would be hard to see from the crowd, and so if you have, maybe they're sitting right there. If you guys wouldn't mind There's probably not enough for everybody, so if you can share with your neighbor, hopefully you can get close enough to either squint and see what's on the paper or see it up on the screen.
No.
But I was going to start by briefly talking about what is a plan for augmentation. And I apologize if I'm speaking down to some folks who already know what this is, but I know we've got a diverse range of backgrounds here in terms of what people do and do not know about water and water law. And so I'll try to take a middle ground and give sort of a brief background on some of the basics before we start talking about this plan in particular. A plan for augmentation, it's a term that is defined in Colorado statute, and basically it is a water court approved plan to increase the supply of water available for beneficial use. And then there's a bunch of different ways how you can do that, but for our purposes, by providing substitute supplies of water. That's a plan for augmentation. Allowing for a new beneficial use of water that would otherwise be junior and in Division II, oftentimes out of priority, by providing a substitute supply of water to make up for that new use. And Kimberly, are you doing or do I have the ability to?
Aim it at the computer.
Maybe Kimberly better do it.
No, I'm getting somewhere. This is above my skill set. This is probably not for our. Does it? Hey, so the statutes also provide the standard for whether a plan for augmentation can be approved or not. And it's a term that some of you have probably heard before, which is no injury. The statute says a plan for augmentation shall be approved if it will not injuriously affect owners of decreed vested water rights or decreed conditional water rights. And the way that you prevent injury is by replacing the out of priority depletions that are caused by the new use of water. You have to replace them at the right time, you have to replace them in the right location, and you have to replace them in the right quantity. And so that's often time, location, and amount, time, place, and amount. You may have heard that phrase before. That's the requirement to operate a plan for augmentation and to get it approved. So a very, very simple example of a plan for augmentation would be if you want to drill a well to serve a new residence. That well is going to obviously pump water out of the aquifer. The residential use actually only uses a very small percentage of the water that's pumped. Most of it, 85, 90 to 95% of that's going to get back to the stream system. And so what's left, the diversion minus what gets back to the stream, is what's called the depletion. And that's the amount of water that you have to replace in the right quantity, in the right time, and at the right location. Now, how we determine the quantity, time, and location, that's what the smart people like Chris, the water resources engineers, get paid to determine. The application, well, going back further, the plan for augmentation that the district currently operates through the majority of its territory, and also the application that the district has filed in this case is for what's sometimes called an umbrella plan for augmentation, or a blanket plan for augmentation, or a regional plan for augmentation. And the basic idea there is it's just like a normal plan for augmentation, except it's sponsored or operated by typically a local governmental entity. It could be a water conservancy district, it could be a county, and it covers a broad but defined geographic area and provides a method to, specifies in the decree the method to determine the time, location, and amount of the depletions from any use of water within that defined geographic area. It identifies the sources of replacement water that will be used to replace the depletions from those uses. And then there is some mechanism by which new uses of water, new augmented structures can be added in the future. So this is probably the first slide in your handout. This is actually a table of a sample of some of the blanket or umbrella plans for augmentation that have previously been decreed throughout the state of Colorado. What you can see from this table is that there are existing blanket plans for augmentation in all 7 of the water divisions in the state of Colorado. I counted up 26 counties, but again, this was just a kind of a brief survey. I'm not sure this is a complete survey of all the umbrella plans in the state. The first was approved, that I'm aware of, was approved in the San Luis Valley in 1985. And so this concept of an umbrella plan for augmentation has been around for almost 35 years. Among those existing plans, as Ken mentioned and I mentioned previously, is Upper Arkansas's existing plans, which the case number with the application was filed in 1992. The decree was entered in 1994, and so Upper Arkansas itself has been operating an umbrella plan for augmentation now for just over 25 years. That original plan for augmentation has been expanded and amended over time. There have been at least 4 different cases, I believe, adding territory to the geographic boundaries of that plan for augmentation. In the case number 2006 CW 32, there was sort of an omnibus amendment that added additional sources of replacement water and additional types of augmented structures throughout all of those augmented areas. That decree also imposes a lot of the current terms and conditions that the district has to follow in order to prove that the plan for augmentation will be operated in a way to prevent injury to vested water rights. So a sample of some of those conditions are, there's a projection tool, which Chris Manera, sitting here, helped to develop, which is a basic software program that looks at all of the district's sources of water in its portfolio. So that's our supply side. It looks at all of the structures that have enrolled in the plan, sort of the demand side, and it projects those supplies and demands out into the future to show that the district has the water supply available to replace the depletions from the structures that are owned by the participants in the plan. There is weekly accounting that George Gertzen, the hydrologist, operates, which is the time step that the plan for augmentation operates on. So every week, the accounting database says, here is how much water, how much depletion is hitting the different stream reaches throughout the service area. And so therefore, that is the quantity of water that you guys have to put back in the stream to replace those depletions. That accounting and replacement gets done on a weekly basis. Then there's also, at the end of the year, there's an annual report that is published that summarizes, on a yearly basis, the amount of depletions that were made and the amount of replacement that was put back in the stream to make up for those depletions. There's a requirement for meter reading to ensure that participants in the plan are not diverting more water than they have signed up for, so to ensure that there's no cheating or gaming the system. Again, another tool to prevent injury and ensure that the plan is being operated in accordance with the terms of the decree. So in terms of how the plan works on the ground, How I mentioned previously, one component of a blanket augmentation plan is the ability to add structures over time. And so what does that look like? Well, if you're the owner of some property and you're looking to make a new use of water, you can file an application on a form that is provided by the district that has been approved by the court that includes all the necessary information to determine the time, location, and amount of your depletions. So that's going to be your well location. It's going to be the type of use that you're going to make. Is it just a domestic use? Are you going to have outside landscaping, lawn and garden irrigation? Maybe it's a commercial use. Maybe you're running a laundromat. All these different types of uses, the decree says, here's how to calculate the depletions from those various uses. Those depletions in the decree are all based on generally accepted engineering principles. They're numbers that have been adopted in standalone augmentation plans as well as blanket augmentation plans throughout the state. They're all generally well accepted and I think generally conservative numbers. So that application gets submitted to the district. The district reviews it for compliance with its requirements and then forwards it on to the division engineer's office. The division engineer reviews the application to make sure that that structure can be augmented in accordance with the terms of the decree. If it's a well, if the structure is a well, it also goes to the state engineer's office, which is the office responsible for reviewing well permits. And there is, throughout that process, the opportunity for any individual to receive notice that that application has been filed, to submit comments to the division and state engineer if they have any concerns about the augmentation of that particular structure. And if you're still upset with the final outcome, there's the opportunity for what's called de novo review by the water court. And so what that means is if it goes through the division engineer process, it gets protested, you're back in the water court process, which is exactly where you would be as an individual water user if this blanket plan for augmentation did not exist. The only way to get your augmentation plan approved is to go to water court. You have the burden of proof. You have to prove that there will be no injury from your use of water and the augmentation thereof. And so there's really no there's no less protection as we see it to existing water users than you would have if the plan didn't exist. The very worst case scenario is the district has to go to water court on a case-by-case basis and prove that a structure to be augmented is not going to cause injury. But so then you may be asking, why do it? The reason to do it is 95% of the structures that are augmented or more, there's no controversy about it. No one has a basis for objection. No one cares. It's inconsequential. And so for the owners of those structures to be able to submit their application and have a plan for augmentation that allows them to drill a well and start using water for a fraction of the cost and in a fraction of the time that they then, as compared to if they had to go through the water court process by themselves, it's a tremendous savings for those water users, and in fact often is probably the difference between whether they can afford to make the use of water or not.
Could we augment every exempt well in Custer County? That would
So the question was,
it would create a deadlock of trying to use this valley's water on a large scale. And that's from a famous scientist that died recently, Dr. Wilbur Miller, he was a scientific advisor to the United Nations, and that's his idea I'm passing along since he's no longer alive.
The question was, could we augment every exempt well within Custer County?
To block
And
any
some
large-scale use of our water, like by Pueblo.
So the answer is no. And the simple reason the answer is no is this plan does not cover all of Custer County. It covers a very, very small fraction of it. The second part of that is, if you look at the exempt well statute, there's some language in there that says the intent, the policy behind that statute is to allow for uses of water in remote areas where a legal water supply is not otherwise available. So a theoretical argument someone could make is once a plan for augmentation is available, there should be no exempt structures because augmentation is theoretically available. I have never seen that position actually implemented. There's still plenty of exempt wells, existing exempt wells, and new exempt well permits issued in portions of Chaffee County and Fremont County where the district has had a plan for augmentation in place for 25 years.
Listen, Dr. Miller's ideas were usually good ones. He helped invent the first atomic bomb, and he was a rancher around here, so it's not like Wilbur was some kind of a kook or something that flipped off these ideas. That was something he thought was important. Anyway, you said
let me
enough.
just finish.
You said enough about it, okay?
Augmenting exempt wells in Custer County would have zero impact on any municipal entity on the Front Range's ability to come in and buy another water right and ship it to the Front Range. So I'll leave it at that. If you have further questions, we can talk afterwards.
I've got your email address.
Kendall, can you talk about exempt and non-exempt wells real quick?
Yes, so the question was, could I talk about exempt versus non-exempt wells? A non-exempt well is a creature of statute. The exempt refers to being exempt from administration within the prior appropriation system. Certain types of small capacity wells are qualify for an exempt well permit. The typical ones we think of are if you have a parcel of land that is 35 acres in size or larger, you can get an exempt well permit to serve in-house use in up to 3 single-family dwellings, up to an acre of lawn and garden irrigation, as well as domestic stock watering. So there's others, small capacity commercial wells for hand washing, toilet facilities in a commercial business. There's a lot of exceptions to those, but that's the idea, sort of a de minimis exception to administration within the prior appropriation system. If you don't qualify for an exempt well and you need to drill a new well, you are subject to administration, and in Division 2, which is an over-appropriated system, that means you have to have a plan for augmentation, which means you either have to develop your own plan for augmentation, or you might be so lucky as to be in an area where a blanket plan for augmentation already exists. I'll get into some of that in a minute. But I mentioned earlier that one of the requirements in the district's existing decree, and which would carry forward and cover any decree that was entered in this area, is for an annual report. And I just excerpted out a couple of pages from the most recent report, which was filed within the last couple of weeks, pertaining to the operations during the 2018 calendar year. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is when we were speaking about this application at the district board meeting in early January, someone made the comment that, well, this is all well and good. You guys can go and get a decree. That doesn't mean you're actually ever going to follow it and you're actually ever going to release water from storage and put water back in the stream. And so I was hoping to pull some information out of this to show that the district does in fact comply with the terms of its decree. It does in fact release a tremendous amount of water back into the stream every year in accordance with that decree in order to replace depletions. So this is probably one of those where it's going to be easier to see if you happen to have one of those pieces in paper in front of you. This is a table that is an example of a monthly storage report. George presents a version of this table every month at the district board meetings, showing and this is again on the supply side. So this is what water resources does the district have available in order to actually replace the depletions by the plan participants.
Who owns Conquistador Reservoir now? Is it the Zeller family yet?
The Zeller family, through an entity, owns a portion of the storage space in Conquistador Reservoir. The district also owns
Have
a
you
portion.
physically seen those reservoirs?
Yes,
You know,
many
they're
times.
just big ponds that the kids fish in.
Okay. For the
Okay.
sake of everybody else,
All right.
here I'm going to try to get through the rest of this, and then if you have more commentary, we can handle it
We've
afterwards.
been living here a long time. We may know more than you on some things. Go ahead.
Okay.
Kendall, we don't want to get into a big arguing thing. I think you guys did a great job of laying out the plan that they were going to present. Kendall was going to present, and then I think Chris was going to present, and then I believe Tim was going to have a little presentation and allow for comments or questions. So as a commissioner, I would ask all of us to respect that. I think they laid that out very clearly. I think they indicated we'd have an opportunity to have something to say. So let's, with all respect, let's just hold all of that until the time is appropriate. Then these guys can get through their plan. They're scheduled from 2 to 4.
With all respect, you jumped up and asked your questions just like I did, so tell yourself to sit down.
That'll be enough of that. So go ahead, Kendall.
Thanks, Tim. So the details of this table aren't necessarily significant unless you have any questions about it, but the point was just to show that ongoing accounting and tracking of the amount of water that the district has available is a significant portion of the district's function in terms of operating its plants for augmentation. This one is even harder to read, but again, this really goes to the point of, or the theory, or the concern that the district doesn't actually do anything. This is you can think of it as a ledger, sort of like the ledger in your checkbook, if anyone still uses those. Every drop of water that goes in and every drop of water that goes out is accounted for in this ledger, like debits and credits. And this is for some of the events in December of 2018. One that I wanted to point out, I didn't pick this one on purpose, but it happens to be on here. About halfway down, maybe a third of the way down the page, you can see releases from Deweese Reservoir, and then a little further down you can see capturing releases from Deweese Reservoir and Pueblo Reservoir. That's part of the program that the district has been participating in for over 10 years, Terry? 10, 15 years, where through an agreement with the BLM, the district exchanges water up into storage in Deweese Reservoir during times of high flow, during like the spring runoff, and then later late in the fall or in the winter when the Grape Creek flows are extremely low, the district voluntarily releases that water out of Deweese Reservoir through Grape Creek for the benefit of the fishery and the environment in that stream. And then the district's able to recapture that water in Pueblo Reservoir, where it can then use it again for augmentation purposes, minus the transit loss. So if you took the time to scan through all those, what you'd see is, release of water, release of water, release of water. On a daily basis, the district is releasing water to replace out of priority depletions pursuant to this plan. The text gets smaller and smaller as we go, but this is probably the end of that. Again, the content of this isn't so important, and if you want a full copy of the annual report, that's something we could provide to you. But the point was just, again, to illustrate, this is a summary of the amount of water, the amount of depletions that were created by the augmented structures throughout the year, and the amount of water that was released by the district to the stream throughout the year in order to replace those depletions. And actually, the amount of water released is slightly more than the amount of depletions, which is the way it should be. While I'm on this page, I was another comment that we heard at the district board meeting in January was there are certain what we call broken or failed augmentation plans in the Wet Mountain Valley. You guys are just going to get another plan for augmentation approved. We're just going to have one more broken plan. There will be no actual protection of senior water rights. Again, this is just another piece of paper. I guess my response to that is twofold. One, the district's been operating its plan for, what did we say, 25 years, and it's not broken. It's operating. You could talk to staff from the Division of Water Resources. I think they would tell you that on whole it's operating quite well. And so we would take slight issue with the argument that the district's plan is going to fail because some subdivision HOA's plan failed when we've been operating a plan for 25 years that isn't failing. Moreover, in the areas where the district has its existing plan, so in portions in Chaffee and western Fremont County, the district has actually played a critical role in fixing many of these broken plans that the division engineer has spotted over the years. The typical scenario is some real estate developer wants to do a subdivision. They know that to get that subdivision approved, they have to have a legal water supply. And in rural areas, that means getting a plan for augmentation. So they go to court, they get the plan for augmentation. It generally involves having to build some, pond somewhere within the subdivision. Hey, that's a good deal for the developer. They wanted to have a cute little amenity aesthetic pond anyway, so we'll just build this little pond that's going to be our augmentation pond, and it's going to have a couple goldfish in it or whatever, and off and running. It's a win-win situation. The problem is, unlike the district, which has an engineer, a hydrologist, other administrators who are paid professionals who do this on a daily basis, and their sole job is to make sure the plan operates, subdivision HOAs don't have the same capacity, they don't have the same resources. They frankly, if anyone here lives in an HOA, you can probably attest, you don't care to spend that much time thinking about it. And so these plans fail because no one's out there making the releases of water or getting the water into storage in the first place, or the pond was supposed to be lined and it turns out it was never lined to begin with, or the liner has failed, and so all the water that was supposed to be in storage has now seeped down into the aquifer, and then you're not able to make the augmentation releases you're supposed to make. So it's really a resources issue. People who are not getting paid to do anything don't have as much of an incentive to make sure it operates. And so those things just fall apart over time. And the district has been able, like I said, to come in many of those scenarios and take that subdivision well and enroll it in the augmentation plan. And now all of a sudden we're making the releases out of, Twin Lakes Reservoir, out of Pueblo Reservoir, out of Conquistador Reservoir, frankly, wherever we need to make the release from. And that release actually gets made at the right time, in the right location, in the right amount to prevent injury. The last excerpt I pulled out of the report, again, not because I expect you to read anything that's on there, but this is a sample of a table from that report, which is a printout of the database of the augmented structures. So again, what I started with by showing you the storage report, which is really the supply side of the augmentation plan. Here are the water resources the district has available to replace its depletions. And this is really the table of the demand side. Here are all the individual structures. Here are their locations. And here is the type of use that's being made. And here's the amount of water they're allowed to take every year, so that we know exactly where and when and how much augmentation water has to go back into the stream system. So, with all that background, the application that was filed in December. This is a map showing what we call the blue line, which is the geographical extent of the proposed plan for augmentation. What you can also see on this, can you guys hear me okay if I'm away from the mic for just a second? Wow. I'm trying to speak loud. One line you can see on this map, predominantly in the upper left-hand or the northwest corner of the map, is a purple line that zigs and zags. That's actually, and then it turns into a blue line. That's actually the geographic extent of the existing plan for augmentation that the district has been operating for 25 years. The blue line that's really in the center part of the map, again, is the proposed expansion area in this case. There's also a couple of small areas at the top of the page and one kind of in the middle, bottom part of the page that are outlined in red. That's also part of the application in this case that we call Area 2. And I'll get into the difference between the blue line and the red line in a second. But you can also see about 2/3 of the way down the page in gray is the boundary between Fremont and Custer counties. And so then you can see, the portion of Custer County that is within the plan area is what I'm kind of tracing right now with the green line. And I'll provide more detail on that boundary in a second.
Does your plan enter the San Isabel National Forest or the Sangre de Cristo Wilderness? You know where that is on that map?
No. There's a lot of BLM area.
It's off to the left side of the map. You see all those indentations?
Yes.
Looks like that goes up into the valleys. Are you going into the National Forest or the wilderness?
No.
Okay.
So the difference between the blue line and the red line is the blue line is the areas where the district can augment structures essentially year-round with water with any of its water resources that are on the main stem of the Arkansas River or in Deweese Reservoir or Conquistador Reservoir. The areas that are the red areas, what we call Area 2, is an area that is upstream of a water right that has the potential to place a call at some point of the year, but not necessarily the entire year. So late summer, when the stream flows come down, and you got an irrigation water right, that water right might start sweeping the stream, in other words, diverting all the water that's physically and legally available, and calling out all of the junior water users upstream of it. In that scenario, we don't have the ability to augment that structure on a year-round basis, because if our augmentation water is available on the main stem of the Arkansas, and there's a water right on, pick a tributary,
Oak Creek.
Then, our water's not going to do that structure any good. You guys all understand that concept. So we're saying, look, we cannot augment any structures year-round above that point. But what we can do, in some cases, on a temporary basis, subject to the water commissioner confirming the water's available, we could allow certain temporary uses of water that don't create any type of lag to depletions like a well. So you can't have a well in this area, but the easiest example of a depletion that would be allowed in this area is Fremont County Road and Bridge Department has a few places on some of these tributaries where they like to dip a hose in the river and pull some water out for road construction, dust suppression, maybe even firefighting types of purposes. And if it's during the time of year when there is no call on that tributary, they could stick the hose in the river, suck out that water. We provide the water on the main stem of the river, where it is able to get down to the controlling call, which is typically somewhere below Pueblo Reservoir, and there's no injury from that new use of water. The next map really zooms in on the portion of the blue line that's within Custer County and tries to show a little more detail of the geographic extent of the plan. The head gates, which mark really the upper boundary, are identified on the map. And again, these are the upper extent, the upstream boundary of the plan area is generally the head gate on the tributary that has the potential to sweep the stream. In other words, take all the water that's physically and legally available and place a call calling out all of the junior water users above it. So, if there is a structure like that on one of these tributaries, we're saying we cannot augment above that point. We don't have the water resources available to prevent injury to that structure, so we're not trying to go above it. I could go through these quickly if you'd like. Or if you want to
hit a few of them.
So,
Can
for
you
example,
start with Henneken Creek that runs through my ranch?
Henneken on Henneken Creek, the Henneken Ditch has been identified as the structure that would have the potential to sweep the stream.
I've seen it sweep the stream. All the fish died one year because when they water in there for 2 days.
So I guess you're telling us we got something right.
You're against fish?
Every once in a while.
They're not sweeping.
We're not sweeping the creek. Great Creek, the Gordon W. Smith Ditch 1, Henneken, I mentioned the Henneken Ditch, Cottonwood, the South Cottonwood Ditch, Middle Taylor, because we do have water in storage in Conquistador Reservoir is the boundary, Alvarado, W.A. Bell number 1, Venable, W.A. Bell number 3, alternate point of diversion. So we've identified those structures and said, look, here are the ones that we recognize have the potential to call, and we're not going to try to augment anything above you. This is a little bit of a segue into, I'm sure most of you, or a significant number of you, were around in 2009, the last time the district filed an application for a plan for augmentation in Custer County, which was much more extensive in scope and went all the way up to, this is an exhibit from that case showing the plan area going all the way up to the watershed boundaries. And the attempt there, in order to augment all the way throughout the county up to the watershed boundary, was, well, we'll go in and we'll build reservoirs on each one of these tributaries, and that'll be the source of water.
What year was that again?
The application was filed in 2009. There was one for the Great Creek drainage, one for the Texas Creek drainage. So the Great Creek drainage had 17 proposed reservoirs on it. The Texas Creek one had 5. And again, the intent was to be able to try to hop over those, or the thought was you could, again, store water during the spring runoff in some of those reservoirs in order to be able to release it to those downstream head gates on these tributaries later in the year when they start calling. So, I mean, the point there is just that the application that was filed in this case is, we view it's much more constrained geographically, it's much more conservative. there's no reliance on acquiring reservoirs the district doesn't already own or constructing reservoirs that don't already exist. I guess maybe more conservative would be an appropriate way to describe it. The significant amount of legwork was done with the local water commissioner's help to make sure that we were not getting above any of these senior local water rights that have the ability to place a call. Kimberly, could I get your help one more time? If we could just go to that Google Earth quick. Some folks have pointed out that the map that was on the screen, as well, which was also attached to the application, wasn't quite at a level of granularity that allowed you to really discern exactly where that boundary was. What?
That's not it.
That's not it. What?
Water.
So what our engineer's done is made the Google Earth file. I think he shared that with Custer County's
Yeah, we provided
GIS.
a shape file, which is a description of that line and graphing to the Custer County GIS department.
So what you can do with the electronic version of this line is just get a lot more granularity than we were able to get on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And Kimberly, if I could ask you to, if we could go south a little bit and to the west. And if you could zoom in right here. So this is obviously Great Creek. I don't know if we can get in any closer or not,
Sure.
but if you can see, essentially, right there. So there's the head gate of the controlling water right on Great Creek, and you can see the boundary is below that. And if you may be asking, why then does the blue line go to the south of it, which appears to be upstream of it, but the boundary essentially follows the contours of the ground, and so that's essentially following the same elevation, and the generally accepted engineering principle in that case is, even if your well was down here where my put by the G and Google, it looks like it's south of this head gate, but because of the contour and the expected contours of the underlying aquifer, you would expect the depletion from a well over here to hit the stream somewhere up here, and therefore the depletion can be replaced out of Conquistador or out of DeWeese Reservoir because the calling water right is downstream at that point.
Or out of Pueblo.
Or out of Pueblo, depending on where the call is at any given time. That's right. Thank you. So I know that was a lot to digest. I know at least one of you will have more questions. So if this is a good breaking, I don't know how much, Chris, did you have specific things you wanted to add, or
I'll just
did you?
I'll go ahead and just.
Chris, do you want this now?
No, that's right. Again, I'm Chris Manera. I'm a civil engineer, water resources engineer for the district. Kendall covered kind of the basics of the geographic area, and so I'll just touch on real quickly on those. As he spoke about the different water right calls, that these boundaries were established up to a point that we have supplies that we've proven that we can replace depletions to the river system. As Kendall was just pointing out, some of these shapes you're looking at they're water right based and they're hydrology based, so they're watershed boundaries in a sense. So the boundaries do follow certain watersheds. So on the creeks, like Kendall just pointed out, there's a real definitive dividing line between where pumping or a spring might affect a creek. The other areas that you see in a little wider berth around like DeWeese, that's the watershed, the hydrology that's tributary to Grape Creek. So you don't have the real defined streams in those areas, but that area is encompassing the watershed that's tributary to Grape Creek. So that's why You see it out expanded out around that area. And the last point I'll add is a lot of the determination on this repayment of the water rights has to do with where the call-in rights are. And for those of you that aren't familiar with how water rights operate, the district does not administer water rights. It's taken care of through the Colorado Division of Water Resources. So it's through them that we know where structures call, where they exist, and what times of years that those have historically happened. In the Arkansas, in other parts of the state, that water, there's not always a water call. They're not over appropriated. If you're not familiar with water rights administration on the Arkansas, there hasn't been free river or water available for new uses for most of its life in modern human times. The last free river, there was a short period in the 90s, a little bit in the 80s, and we're talking big, multiple wet years is when all the reservoirs are satisfied, all the irrigation ditches are satisfied. So augmentation is really needed because there's just always a call on the river to some extent. Now that changes when we start working up to these side tributaries. You can start to have side tributaries that have to pass water downstream. They're not sweeping the stream because they're having to supply more senior water rights down at La Junta, down on the main stem. You also have administration that can happen, as a lot of you know that have the water rights on these streams, to maybe your water rights in part of the year, but then you have to then get administered and turned off to satisfy the next ditch down below you.
Remind us what sweeping the stream means.
So sweeping the stream means that
running
physically,
it dry.
So when a water right, let's say on one of the side tributaries, is not, so every water right has to have a decree that states how much they can divert, what it can be used for, where it can divert from, and then typically like on irrigation structures where the acreage associated with that water right is. So if a water right is not receiving its supply, and I guess probably the most important is its date and time. We call it priority. So the older a water right is, if its priority date is older and it's not getting its supply, the water commissioner, the Division of Water Resources, can go upstream and turn off what we call more junior water rights. And so what happens is typically there will be one water right on the side tributaries that in order to get its full supply is diverting the entire creek, and other water rights up above it are having to pass water to satisfy it. So that water right is typically, we call it controlling structure. At times, it will sweep the creek, so there's physically a dry section, which happens on most streams across the state. You don't always see them, they happen. And then it also, the controlling structure then will also control water rights within its watershed itself. As far
Use
as
an
administration.
example, the Hennequin example you used. So there's a head gate there and there's a right way below somewhere.
Yeah.
And if it calls for it, it could sweep the stream and explain that.
Yeah, so what happens is like on the Hennequin, the sweeping rights it's an old enough water right that it does not get turned off because of the 1880 water rights in La Junta. So it is old enough that it has a better priority, so the state's not going to shut them off, and it doesn't have to bypass water by not shutting them off. So they become the controlling right that they're going to get satisfied there. So in some cases, what you can have is then you can have other water rights that are upstream of the Hennequin that are still senior to the main stem call. So they will utilize all the physical flow within that watershed amongst themselves. And so that's what we call a controlling right. The sweeping right and the other water rights use the entire flow available at that time of year for their decreed uses. And so when you have that sweeping right conditions, you cannot put a new depletion upstream of there unless you can replace this.
Right, in that case, can you augment?
You cannot augment in that case. So our work has been, we've analyzed throughout all these areas, thousands of water rights. We've looked at where they're at on the streams. We've worked with the Division of Water Resources. We've looked at historical diversion records. We've looked at various court decrees, and we've met with people, different ditch owners, and that's how these points that are shown on the application, we knew we couldn't go any farther than that. We don't have the supplies. So that's the geographical, how the geographical extents were determined.
So I'm not talking about ditches, I'm talking about creeks. When you dry up those creeks in 10 minutes, all the fish are dead. I know you don't care, but we do.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're not changing anything. These plans don't change the way.
Don't you
the
honor
water
the concept of minimal stream flows to keep the
So the minimum
fish
stream
alive?
flows are water, so within the water rights framework, there's also methods to deal with minimum stream flows. The state of Colorado is the only one that has the authority to go out and decree water rights for minimum stream flow. So there are minimum stream flow reaches that I deal with as a professional all across the state. There are not any within this section of Custer County that we're working with.
That was my question too.
So that's on the, I think Kendall covered most of the others as far as how the OG plan works. I just wanted to give the background on the geographic area.
Thanks.
Bright light. So I'm going to stand just a little bit off to the side.
A little
so
taller.
I'm not looking at that. So I'm going to clear the air just a little bit for our county commissioners. Shame on me. I should have had this meeting months ago.
Yes.
It's out there. I'm going to own it. Shame on me. I'm here today. Let's put all that aside. I can't change any of that. We're already here today. What I want to know today is, does everyone understand? And I've got 4 or 5 little questions here. These are really key, important questions. What's an augmentation? Does everyone in this room understand what an augmentation is? If we do not, we're going to go back over it because that's critical. Number 2, what's an exchange and how does it work?
I don't understand what an exchange is.
Kendall, you're on.
Listen, is our H2O ranch that's dried up, was that an exchange?
No.
No, they sold that.
Bought the water and they're gonna move it.
That's a buy and dry. Total different thing. Kendall, exchange.
Yeah, so that's actually a good segue to one of the board members here mentioned to me, one of the, I guess rumored be the appropriate word, I can't think of another word to call it, about what this plan is. It's a plan for the Upper Arkansas District to sell water to Denver. So first off, we don't have the legal authority to do that. We don't have the desire to do that. It's not why the district was formed. And setting all that aside, that it's basically the exact opposite of what is happening here. This plan is not acquiring any new irrigation water rights like the H2O Ranch. It's taking water rights that are already in the district's portfolio, which does include some of the A. Katzenstein Ditch, which is a wet mountain valley water right, which was first purchased, quantified, and dried up back in like 1977 to develop the Hermit Basin Lodge. So that was ag land that had already been taken out of irrigated production. The district had an opportunity to buy a portion of that water right and put it to use for augmentation. So we have the water rights that we're going to use. We're not coming and grabbing wet mountain valley water. We're taking the water we already have and using that to replace depletions from potential new uses of water within the wet mountain valley. So segueing back to exchange. How is it that we can use our Twin Lakes water or our Friend Ranch water, which is a water right down on the South Arkansas by Poncha Springs? How can we use that water to replace depletions that are happening in the Wet Mountain Valley in Custer County? The answer is by exchange. So the way an exchange works is, well, I'll just use the map we have here. So we all know this is Deweese, right? The district has storage space in Deweese Reservoir. The Grape Creek runs from Deweese Reservoir down to the main stem of the Arkansas. At times, when there are no calling water rights on Grape Creek, the district can store water in Deweese Reservoir, and in return for duplicate, that storage is going to be out of priority. You all heard Chris say there's never a free river on the Arkansas, and so every drop of water that you take, you got to replace it. So we can divert and store water in Deweese Reservoir and replace an equivalent amount of water on the main stem to satisfy the downstream calling water right, which again, 99 times out of 100 is going to be at or below Pueblo Reservoir. That's the senior that's entitled to the water that we just stored out of priority. So that's the idea of an exchange. Taking water out of the stream at an upstream location and providing a substitute supply downstream, but still above the calling water right that's entitled to that water. Related to that is the idea of augmentation by exchange. I used the previous example of suppose you had a well down here at the, kind of at the southern extent of our augmentation area on Grape Creek. Well, we don't have storage above that on Grape Creek.